Hi, everybody. I'm Terry Norton. Welcome to our ICFLA webinar. I'm your host for today, and our co-host Chris Lake in the corner there, you can see, will join me in this program and manage Zoom controls, chat, and other features. We're happy that you've joined us today supporting today's event. The name of the event is Supporting the Soul at Work, Coaching Approaches for Times of Loss and Grief with speaker Carrie Hopkins-Doubts, PCC. All right, let me tell you a little bit about Carrie. Carrie Hopkins-Doubts is a spiritual resilience coach specializing in supporting people through significant life transitions like bereavement, divorce, career change, and other forms of loss. At Life's Next Chapter Coaching, she offers services to help people reconnect with their hearts, reclaim their power, and realign with their purpose to create a life they love on the other side of change. Her coaching is rooted in extensive training and personal experience. I have a little fun fact for her from her. Her self-proclaimed superpower is she knows how to handle the art of the 5-minute nap and has even done so on a motorcycle. So I will turn it over to you. Welcome, Carrie.
Thank you, Terry. Yes, on the back of a motorcycle, not driving the motorcycle. Let's just, be real clear on that. I've not been a hazard to humanity on the road while falling asleep, just riding. So anyway, welcome everyone. It's so great to have you here. I've got some slides for you, so I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. So here we go. Share. And I will also, there we go. So everybody can see my slides okay? So again, welcome. I just wanted to, let you know that loss is part of life. And, we are souls, having a human experience even while we're at work. And since loss is part of life, their normal response to loss is grief. And when people experience significant loss, it's a life experience that usually can't be left outside of the door of the workplace. So, we're going to talk today about how grief affects people in concentration, decision making, affects their attendance at work, their engagement. Also, it affects sometimes the retention of people in the workplace. And left unsupported, grief really drives absenteeism, a word probably you haven't heard, presenteeism. We'll talk about that in a minute. It affects turnover and it can result in measurable financial costs to organizations. And so, if you're working in an organization supporting people in the workplace, it's bound to come up because what affects us in our real life is going to affect us everywhere. So, this is, this session combines information about the grieving process and practical and compassionate approaches that you can use to support your clients when they're dealing with unexpected and unwanted change. So I've been a grief coach a grief counselor for about, well, since 2013. I'm not good with the math, but I've created a 9-step program called Rebuilding Your Life After Loss. And I've been using it to coach people going through these major life changes. We'll talk about the kinds of changes that create loss and grief. So I've been doing this through individual coaching, group coaching. I have an online course, and I'm now in the process of publishing a book on the topic. So this is my life's work. I'm very excited to speak with you about it. And during our time together, if you find that you have any questions, and there'll be times also that I'm asking for responses from people, just feel free to share in the chat. I'm not able to really see everybody, so Terry is going to help me with calling my attention if there's a question. So, what are we going to do today? Our learning objectives are we're going to identify the grief related signals that can show up at work. So you can recognize the behavioral and performance indicators of grief and differentiate them from further other causes of underperformance. Also, we're going to learn some of the coaching skills, probably that you already know. And these are those that are rooted in ICF core competencies. And we'll talk about those that create a psychological, safe, and compassionate space for your grieving clients. And we're going to cover today so that you would know when it's advisable to refer your clients to other mental health professionals and to assist them in working with more complicated kinds of grief. So that's what we're going to cover today. And let's talk about what kinds of losses. Take a look at some of these experiences. They're part of the human landscape that can occur in the workplace. And as you're looking these over, if you have any thoughts about any other loss experiences that you can think of, just go ahead and put those in the chat. Often, it's something that can be a shared experience, like an important relationship loss. I've worked with people who have had the loss of a leader in the organization, and people have needed to have some help with processing through that. So let me know if there's any other, experiences that you're aware of, and Terry can call that out from the chat. So, look, it's going to affect us all on all levels: physical, mental, emotional, social, and spiritual, even. So, we're going to talk today about the physical, mental, emotional, and social experiences of grief, so you get a sense of how it affects us. So, let's start with the physical. So, often trouble sleeping is an issue with people who are going through loss. They wake up in the middle of the night or they have trouble falling asleep. I know that for myself, this is something that I experienced. One of the things about me is I've experienced loss of a spouse through divorce and through being widowed 5 years ago. So I've experienced this kind of loss. Personally, and it has really informed my practice in making my experience kind of relatable to the people I'm working with. So trouble sleeping was really a problem for me. And having low energy also is a result of not sleeping well. And just it takes a toll on you physically to be dealing with the emotional and physical aspects of grief. So you feel exhausted all the time. There's muscle aches and pains sometimes, and immune suppression. Often people find themselves more susceptible to the colds and viruses that keep coming around. So their immune system can be weakened. Also very common, either a weight loss or a weight gain. Often people, they react to this kind of stress by not being able to eat. So you see people dropping weight kind of suddenly, or emotional eating can be an issue as well. Heart palpitations. This is kind of common because it can feel like your heart's under attack, because of the pain that you're feeling. So sometimes people will experience these heart palpitations, and sometimes it's something that has to be looked at by a medical professional. Tension headaches, that was one that I got a lot of. It was, it just seemed like I started and ended every day with a headache, and, taking Advil all the time. So stress is part of the physical reaction. So anything that stresses you out in your physical body, it's going to be present. And sometimes even shortness of breath. I've had people, experiencing panic attacks. So they get the heart palpitations, the shortness of breath. And, it's really important to just help people slow down, have a moment of breathing, deep breathing, just to help people calm themselves down. So you may see any of these things in your clients. So experiences of grief on the mental level are sometimes there's an initial denial of what's happened. It's like, Oh, I didn't lose that job. Oh no, I didn't lose my spouse. There's just that initial, this didn't happen, this can't be happening. What's very common, and you'll see, is this, they call it grief brain. It's like if you feel like you're in a fog, your thinking is not sharp, you don't feel really able to focus and concentrate on things. So it can feel like a disorganized thinking. Also, it can feel like I can't even make the simplest of decisions. I'm just sitting here staring at the choices and I can't decide. So you actually start to avoid things, and you might even have irrational thoughts. The person, so I'm talking about first person you or second person you, but this may be noticeable in the workplace where you notice this in other people. Avoidance, also avoidance of situations, avoidance of having thoughts about things. And often it can show up, we're anger is part of grief also. We'll talk about that. And anger and blame and judgment can really come forward where, especially if there's a loss in the workplace related to the job, people can hang on to that judgment of themselves of, oh, I guess I wasn't capable enough to get that promotion, or I guess, they're all out to get me, or whatever it is. So you'll notice that there might be thinking along the lines of blame, judgment of self and others. And it also often shows up as a lot of thinking and ruminating about the past, and coming up with regrets. Especially in the case of bereavement and loss through death, you get people's like, I wish that I had told this person this, that, and the other thing. There's an incomplete communication with the person who died. So there's a real feeling of regret and remorse and rumination about that. And the emotional experiences are pretty, clear. There's often an initial shock and a numbness that kind of sets in, where people can't feel the feelings that they're feeling, and then followed by emotional flooding. So the crying, and it's like a difficulty with stopping crying. So we call that emotional flooding, where the person is just, they feel like they're unable to stop the emotional responses. Now, of course, the feelings of sadness, anger, anxiety, and fear, because we're not certain about the future anymore. So that will create anxiety and fear. Guilt is a big one. And often it can be accompanied with a sense of helplessness and hopelessness. And also this sense of longing or yearning for the person or the situation that's been lost. And really that sort of nostalgia and longing for the past. And the social, isolation and withdrawal. You might see this, people who are normally very social, very engaged with others, they might really be pulling back and not really wanting to uh, take part in group gatherings. Just they'll want to avoid that. And we'll talk a little bit about, how sometimes that's a self-fulfilling prophecy, because in being in groups, often people who are grieving can be subject to experiences of misunderstanding by people, and they can feel really hurt. So they feel like I don't even want to put myself out there in any social situations, because people will, misunderstand what I'm going through, or just tell me I need to just get over it and move on, and that's painful. So um, feeling awkward, feeling like they don't belong. No, I no longer belong in this group. They can receive a lack of understanding and support from others, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Also, sometimes when there's the death of a spouse, there's financial, legal issues, divorce, all that kind of stuff, and that can create a lot of stress for the people going through that. And you'll notice that people with holidays and anniversaries, they will tend to maybe not want to participate as much. Um, Anniversaries, birthdays, Christmas or Passover or any of those social holidays that they spent with loved ones who are no longer here. It's difficult for them. So they talk about, well, let's just skip this year. And loneliness is really a big can be a really big problem because they're isolating and withdrawing, and also still at the heart of it, feeling lonely and missing the person that is no longer with them. So this is what it feels like. It kind of feels emotionally like a roller coaster, and it's not the fun kind, right? It's ups and downs and twists and turns. It feels unpredictable. It can feel scary to most people. And I'm just curious, I'll just stop for a second. If there's anybody here in the group would like to share about an experience of workplace grief that you've been working with or that you've been through, either your colleagues or clients that you've been working with, anybody have anything they'd like to share that is relevant to this.
There's a few people that share some thoughts in the chat. I don't know if you saw that.
No, I can't see the chat at all, so maybe
Okay,
you can
well,
read
let
out.
me read to
Oh,
you
thank
what some
you.
of the things were. Um, Loss of a beloved pet, having to lay people off in wildfire country. Here's California, so loss of home, treasured belongings, cutting program services due to budget shortfalls, merger acquisition leading to the loss of organizational values, retirement. A comment from John Ward. It can be useful to consider that even achieving things that we dearly want, successes, also evoke their own powerful emotions. I'd call it grief. This is counterintuitive. We really do experience grief from any change. This can be useful for a coach to help with their clients note and notice that. And last, death within an organization, especially a suicide.
Yeah. These are all really great examples, and thank you for that. Death by suicide we'll talk about that, where trauma and what we call complicated grief can really, you know, take a toll on people and prolong the grieving process. So these are great examples. So thank you, everybody. And so here, as a coach, you may be working inside an organization, supporting the leaders, supporting managers, teams, employees, anybody who may suddenly start exhibiting these signals that they might be going through loss and grief. Here's some things to look for. So if you know, and these are, it's like people are known usually by their baseline performance. So it's anything that strikes as unusual for that person. So if somebody suddenly is having concentration difficulties, or if they're feeling disorganized in their work, they're missing important deadlines and seem to be not really aware of deadlines approaching, increased or prolonged absence from work, and they may be taking FMLA time off. You may see people, not able to come to work for weeks and even months at a time. And this idea of presenteeism, they're present, but they're not really there. They're just kind of half there. Also, you can see changes in their interpersonal behaviors among teams, where all of a sudden they're not as engaged as much, or they may be, having difficulties with engaging and working with others, withdrawal, irritability, emotional outbursts that seemed out of context and out of the normal for that person, just noticing that. Often, you'll hear that they'll be requesting more flexible hours or phased in return or role adjustments. They may say, I don't feel like I can fulfill this management role right now, given the the nature of this loss that I've gone through, and I'd like to have my role adjusted. So these are some of the things that could signal that a person may be having a difficult loss that is around the home or their personal life. And so when you're noticing that, you may ask your client, what's occurring? What's going on for you? I notice that, You're not seeming like you normally show up. And they may have already told you as part of the coaching, container, but you may ask your client what's occurring in their lives if they're not sharing with you that's leading them to perhaps be going through an experience of loss and grief. And as you hear their story, you can keep in mind the factors that will influence the severity of the grieving process and its duration sometimes, and it's really something to pay attention to. So factors to consider are the importance of the loss. Is this a spouse or a partner or a child or somebody who's really close in to them? That's really going to be more influential than the loss of somebody who they're not very close to, a neighbor or, and it just really depends on the importance of that person to the person that you're talking to. Often also multiple losses over a short period of time. And I can share a story about a client that I worked with who she had lost not only her sister, but her father in a 6 month period of time. And when I came in to work with her, her leader had actually asked her to consider being coached because of her she'd really just withdrawn from the workplace, and she was in a position of leadership, a very important position, and they really wanted to support her in being able to come back into her full capability as a leader. So I worked with her for 6 months, and not only had she lost her sister and her father, but she lost another brother during the course of our time together when we were coaching. And it was really important for her to be able to slow down and unpack and grieve separately each of these losses because they were different relationships to her and there were different tensions in some of the relationships. So having multiple losses, you really want to pay attention to that. So also the number of secondary losses that a person's going through, like for instance, in a divorce, not only is a person losing their primary relationship, but they're also losing perhaps the relationship with their in-laws, and that may be, a real problem if they've been close. The how if there's children involved, the effects on the children, and whether the other spouse is going to be part of their lives or not. They may have to move from the marital home. They may have to relocate. The other spouse who may not be working at the time may have to get a job. So there's a number of secondary losses that need to be named and also sort of acknowledged when you're working with somebody like that. And also the physical and mental sort of health of the person at the time that they are going through the loss. So somebody who's already physically or having a mental health issue like depression or anxiety at the time of the loss, that can also deepen the experience of grief and make it last longer. It can lead to what we call complicated grief, where there's not just one thing going on for the person. So, and also look at the quality of support. Do they have support? Do they have people that they can talk to? Are they in addition to friends and family, are they in need of maybe a coach or a mental health professional or a counselor to help them work through the grieving process? We tend to think that, oh, I just need to, it's one of the myths that we go through. I just need to handle this on my own. And people will tend to isolate. But it's really important to ask, are you getting some kind of support with this while you're going through it? So this is what your client might seem to be dealing with, just this cluster of experiences, of feelings, of thoughts, of overwhelmed is certainly a big part of it. People can feel abandoned at this time because they can feel like nobody really understands them. I've had clients when they were talking about, well, yes, I'm going through a divorce and, I'm really sad and hurt about it. And when all the people around me keep saying things like, well, you're better off without that person. You just need to, pull yourself up by your bootstraps and move on. And they don't really understand that the person who's going through the divorce, even if they're the one who initiated it, can and probably will be experiencing some kind of grieving process. So, and here's the thing. We try to cope with loss. Our society, I would have to say, it doesn't prepare us very well to work with the grieving process consciously. So often people try to cope by using coping strategies. Now, there's some that are what we call adaptive, like you can throw yourself into your work, or you can find yourself distractions by hobbies and things that you're interested in. Some are maladaptive, and what that means is they create other problems on their own, like, okay, binge watching TV and really just kind of checking out. Here's another one, stuffing your feelings. A bottle in front of me or a frontal lobotomy is a fun way that people talk. Let me just drown my sorrows in drink, in alcohol and drugs. And also just being sort of very volatile and blaming everybody. And here's the thing, these are coping strategies, but they don't work ultimately to help a client resolve what's going on for them in the grieving process. So you'll see them, and I've certainly done my share of coping strategies. Just because if you think about it, we're wired really to deal with pain by numbing it out. We are wired with trying to avoid pain, and it's important to understand that about it's just kind of a natural tendency. However, when working with people who are going through a painful situation, it's really important to help them understand that if they're just numbing themselves and avoiding the pain, it's really not going to work to help them resolve and move through and adapt to the losses that they're dealing with. So here's how we can help. So I'm going to talk to you about specifically some of the core competencies and some of the skills that you already know, and some that just could be teased out more to the fore when you know that you're working with a grieving client. So the first one is the core competency of demonstrates ethical practice. So specifically 1.7 in the core competencies refers clients to other support professionals as appropriate. We're going to get into that in a little bit, just so you know what are some of the red flags where you might want to make sure that the person is adequately supported by a mental health professional. So that's the first one. That cultivates trust and safety is an important core competency as well to actively demonstrate. And we'll talk about 4.1, which is seeks to understand the client within their context, which may include their identity, environment, experiences, values, and beliefs. And grief certainly fits into the experience. So understanding the client's context, they're grieving. Shows support, empathy, and concern for the client is 4.4. So we're going to really bring forward our empathy and our willing to just be a safe space for the client to work through the feelings and the thoughts and the experiences that they're having. Um, we're going to talk about maintains presence, and I think presence is really the main thing that you can offer, your presence to a client who's going through a grieving process. So there's a whole bunch of competencies, core competencies under this one. 5.1 remains focused, observant, empathetic, and responsive to the client. So we're not ignoring the fact that, okay, your client is presenting in a different way than they normally do, and they may not want to be talking about their big, corporate goals right now. They want to talk about what's on their mind and what's on their heart. So 5.3 remains aware of what's emerging for self and client in the present moment. So it's also when you're working with somebody, often it can trigger our own sense of, I'm not sure how to support this client, or it can trigger our own sense of loss also. So it's really maintaining that awareness of what's going on inside of you and for your client while they are talking through this stuff. 5.4 manages one's emotions to stay present with the client. So we've all had those feelings of, I need to really just notice what's going on inside of me and then really double down on my listening and my focus to remain with the client and not so much with what's going on for me right now. It's telling yourself, I hear you, I feel you, I will get back to you. Let's go focus back on the client. 5.5 demonstrates confidence in working with strong client emotions during the coaching process. Yeah, your client may exhibit anger, may cry, strong emotions are part of the process. And our ability to just hold with that in our presence, which is accepting and companioning with that person while they experience these emotions. 5.6 is comfortable working in a space of not knowing. Yeah, this is so important because everyone's grief is different, and we might think we know where this is going, or we might know what we need to say to help this person. We don't know. Our best thing is just maintain that presence and maintain that ability to sit in the not knowing where this is going for the client. And also, 5.7 creates or allows space for silence, pause, or reflection. Often, just giving the client just that time to just be with themselves. And we're not saying anything, just being with them in presence. So powerful, so healing. And then we talk about 6, which is listens actively. Of course, we're listening. We're acknowledging the client's situation. We're validating their feelings. Yes, you're going through a divorce. It makes sense that you feel this way. So we're noticing, this is 6.4, noticing, acknowledging, and explores the client's emotions, energy shifts, nonverbal cues, and other behaviors. And also 6.5 integrates the client's words, the tone of voice, and body language to determine the full meaning of what the client is communicating. So it's a full body listening. We're listening with our hearts, we're listening with our minds, we're listening with our energy fields. We're listening to what's going on in our bodies in response to what's going on for the client. So these are the core competencies that I'm sure you've been very well grounded in. So it's just really maintaining that these are really the important ones to embody and to demonstrate when you're working with a client going through grief and loss. So I would just love to open it up if there's any questions or any thoughts that people would like to share given this point in the presentation.
You can go ahead and just unmute yourself, but Betty, I see your hand up. Let's go. You can go first.
Hi, Betty.
Hello, Carrie. Thank you so much. I guess one of the things I am curious about is obviously I've also gone through grief, so I know what it's like to go through that loss. And when you're very inward and you don't feel like engaging or opening up to more people, as the coach, how do you really encourage them to seek support, even though you're as a coach, you're not supposed to guide or, recommend, right? And I think it's a fine line if they're like, yeah, I talked to my sister, or,
Oh,
but probably isn't enough, right? If, say, the sister's also grieving the loss of the same person. So how do you balance that as a coach?
That's a great question, Betty, because you're right. We're not going, you should, da, 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 right? We're just asking. So what kind of support are you receiving with this? Who can you talk to? Who do you feel safe with? And when I'm working with people, often they will tell me about the people in their lives. And often what happens is the people in their lives can be sorted into three different categories. Those that are helpful, can companion and listen and not try to fix and move the person along. So the people that are helpful to them, those that are neutral, they're just neither helpful nor, harmful. And then those are what they can actually be felt as toxic, where they're trying to fix, they're trying to give rationalizations or these little pats on the head of, oh, he's better off, without, suffering. And, so there's people that when you're grieving, you have this feeling like I need to wrap myself up in bubble wrap before I go out and be among people, because it's just people are very well meaning. They don't mean to be hurtful, but they just don't really understand, especially those who have never been through this kind of a grief or a loss situation. So for me, it's more like asking. What kind of support are you receiving? Well, I just don't want to talk to this with anybody because they don't understand. It's like, I hear you. And perhaps, we could brainstorm some ideas where you could find some people that might be more helpful. And we'll talk in a little bit about some of those red flags where I would actually be a little bit more direct in suggesting that the person seek the help of a mental health professional. So
Thank
great
you.
question, Betty.
Thank
Uh, is it Lee Ray or
Lorraine, yes,
Ray?
thank you.
Yes.
I'm curious, and thank you for the entire session. This is terrific. And I'm curious what, if anything, would change in your approach when you're talking about anticipating grief, loss and grief. For example, somebody who's terminally ill, your days are numbered, or you're on a this is my story at the moment, you're on a high performing team that's about to be dismantled and redistributed, reassigned. What's the best approach with getting ready for that moment and being there for the person in those cases?
Yeah, what a brilliant question. Anticipatory grief is something that we think about in our minds. This is the situation that's coming. We're not actually feeling it in the present. We might be like projecting ourselves into the future and feeling like, oh, I'm really going to miss this team. I'm really going to miss, but it's really more of a mental thing. So it's like we can prepare ourselves for, look, I have some strong feelings I imagine that are going to be present when this actually happens. And it's like it's a mock-up in our mind. So I've had so many people tell me, especially with caregivers for people who are quite ill, and anticipatory grief is like something that they talk about a lot, but they always say to me that never really prepared me for how I would feel when it happened. Because the feeling is in the present. It's something we experience right now, and we can think we know how we're going to feel. Oftentimes we miss the mark. However, it is helpful to just say, I need to prepare myself. Maybe I need to prepare myself by cultivating some good friends, who could be there for me, or also just making plans for, I know I might need some extra support when this happens. So I don't know if that answers your question. It's a great question. I can take one more. So Kibi.
Hi, thank you, Carrie. I'm just curious, what are the signs where you know somebody is perhaps like a good candidate for coaching versus therapy? I think that's one of the things that I'm trying to understand, especially when it comes to this topic.
Yeah, yeah. I think if we go on, I'm going to be talking about how and when to refer someone out. So if your question doesn't get answered, please, come back to me, okay? So let's move on. So everyone deals with grief differently. This is an important thing to remember. You can have two people grieving the loss of the same person and have a completely different experience based on their relationship, based on what's going on for them personally. And this whole idea that grief is healable and you can resolve it and you can leave it behind, depending on the loss that you're grieving, it's really just something that you need to adopt into your life and know that this grief and this loss, it's going to be with me, perhaps for a lifetime, because there are experiences that it can trigger, the intensity of what we call a grief trigger. But it's also, that this person who's been a part, say, part of your life for most of your life and is suddenly gone, we don't, resolve the grief so that we never feel it anymore. It's just part of life. We adapt to it. And so I like to call it a journey without a destination. And so it just helps people understand that if they're going through a really earth-shattering kind of loss, that the grief is going to stay with you and perhaps as part of your life. So let's talk about, there are ways of, we as human beings, we like to understand things. We like to know what's an approach that makes sense with something. So the work of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross is very popular. The stages of grief model that you probably all heard of, that there's these 5 stages of denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Now, a lot of the people who work with grief and grief counseling notice that there's limitations to that approach and that it makes people feel like there's some kind of uh, this literal way of stepping through a grieving process, that you're going to go through like all of these stages, in order. And if you're not doing it in this way, you're doing it wrong. It's not helpful a lot of times for people because grief is not necessarily a linear process. But one of the approaches that I find helpful to help people understand is when you're grieving, grief is what you feel on the inside. Mourning is the behaviors and the attitudes and the things that you're doing on the outside to work with the grief that you're feeling. So there's the work of this William Worden, who talks about the tasks of mourning. So it's a kind of accepted that there are tasks that you'll go through and accomplish in the grieving process that will help people sort of reorient themselves to their new normal. So I'll go through these. First is, yes, accepting the reality of the loss. So there's an importance to I know that when my husband first passed, it was hard for my mind to get wrapped around the fact that he wasn't going to walk in the door. And I would keep looking for him, and I would see somebody who looked like him in a crowd, and I would start to follow that person, but oh, it's not him. So it's just this kind of thing that in your mind you have to adapt and orient yourself to the fact that the person that is gone is really gone. So that's the first task. The next is processing the pain of the grief. And this is where we can help as coaches because we are people who care about them. So we can help them with these qualities that we talked about in the core competencies of cultivating and maintaining safety, of also the ethical practice, knowing when we can help and knowing when we need to call in the support of others, also maintaining presence and listening. These are the ways that we can help somebody process the pain. So no longer avoiding it or distancing or numbing from the pain, facing the pain. And I'll talk to you about some of the ways to look at that. Adjusting to a new world. Now, this is huge, and it takes place not only externally, but internally, and there's spiritual adjustments that people need to make to reorient themselves into a life without that person, without that job, without the beloved pet, whatever it is that the person has lost, that they need to make these adjustments, and that takes time. Also, the last task, and this is one that I think it's given little context or little attention in people's lives, where especially when it's a beloved person that you've lost, it's really important to create for yourself an enduring connection with the person that was lost. Now, you'll hear people say things like, well, I talk to him every day, or I talk to my mom. I see her in the this or that, so it's really recognizing that a relationship, an important relationship does remain inside of us, even though the person is gone, and the love that we felt for that person, we still retain that, and we can express and we can feel that love for the person even if they're not with us. And a lot of people are told, oh no, you just need to, get over them and move on and erase them from your lives. And that just doesn't work. So it's just an important sort of thing to keep in mind if your client starts saying things like, well, I talked to, this mentor that I had. I ask him questions, even though he's not here, and, I get answers. And just to not sort of say, oh, that sounds weird and wrong, it's just this is their way of creating that enduring connection to that person. So let's talk about how to help meet your client's emotions with compassion. And this work, it's loosely based on the work of acceptance and commitment therapy, and it's one thing I use it with myself. I use it with clients, and the first thing is to help your client notice that they're having a feeling. A lot of times somebody said, I'm not quite sure of my feelings. I think I'm having a feeling, but I seem out of sorts. I seem, irritable. What's going on? So you can ask them, so what are you feeling? What are you feeling? And helping them name it. Well, I'm feeling, and good and bad and fine. They're not feelings. They're just labels. So you want to go beyond what are you feeling? Well, I'm feeling disjointed. I'm feeling sad. I'm feeling hurt. Get them to name the feeling so that they can really kind of get their hands around what it really is, and then also to accept it as it is. It's like we hear people say, oh, I'm feeling anger and I just want to get rid of it. It's really helpful to help a person slow down and say, you know what, given the situation and circumstances you're in, it's understandable that you would feel angry. So let's just give this emotion of anger some space. Let's just breathe into it together for a moment here, so you have some time to be with it. And your anger, your sadness, your all of these things, your feelings, once they're accepted and named, we can start to ask it, why are you here? What are you here to tell me? What message do you have for me? And so allowing for that expression of the feeling, and allowing for the exploration of what is it here to tell you? Well, the anger could be, a signal that some kind of boundary has been crossed, and I need to really pay attention to that. Or the sadness is just this is the sadness that I feel of missing this person as a part of my life, and I just need to give it expression. And while we're doing that, we're encouraging our client to be kind to themselves while they're experiencing the emotion. No shooting on themselves, no saying, oh, I don't like it when I feel this way. It's just like you're having a moment of suffering. Be kind. Be kind to yourself. And often I'll just have them, can you just place your hand on your heart while you're feeling this? Can you just notice that feeling of warmth in your hand as it's on your heart, and that feeling, what does that feel like to you? Does that feel like gentleness and kindness and self-acceptance? So it's just really helping the client slow down and meet themselves and where they are. And then after the time spent with processing an emotion like this, it often gets the client thinking back into, well, what's really important to you in this situation? What's always important to you? What are your values? And we can help the client take action, move forward in a way that's congruent with their values. So this is the framework that I use in working with emotions that come present. And you'll notice there's a quality when the person is actually feeling the emotions in the present moment, because they'll be emoting, they'll be crying, and you'll notice the energy. So contrasted with talking about the emotions, where they're kind of reporting, well, I felt really sad. Well, I felt really angry. If you can get them to name, excuse me, the feeling in the present, you can help them process it better. So I'm just going to take a drink of water here. I love this quote. It really has informed the work that I do with people, because it is really helping them express and feel the pain of their loss. And the second is rebuilding your life after loss, which is my program. So it's the remaking of a life without that person or that situation or the circumstance that they've lost. And so I'm going to talk about what we call kind of the red flags, where you really want to pay attention. And if you hear or see these things, make note of it. And if you're in a coaching supervision, your relationship with someone, and you're not sure how to introduce the client into the idea of seeking therapy, you might want to talk with your supervisor. I also talk with people. I'm a coaching supervisor as well. And when people are noticing these kinds of things, I help the coach frame the conversation with the client, so that's not really received. Well, we don't know how anything is ever going to be received, but that it's not delivered in a way that would feel defensive for the person. So first of all, you notice that your client is 6 months, 8 months into a project, and they're not making any progress. They're just stuck. They're really, sort of stuck in this grieving cycle that is taking their energy, taking their focus, and they're not making progress on the things that are usually important to them. Also, that grief is interfering with their daily functioning. You're noticing, okay, well, they're obviously they're telling you, oh, I'm not sleeping well. They may, you may notice a difference in grooming, not taking really good care of themselves, not eating well, not showing up like they normally would. And that, they say things like, I just spent all day Saturday in bed and I didn't even want to get up for Monday. So just pay attention to those kinds of things. Trauma associated with the loss. If they tell you in the process of the loss, of a suicide or of a trauma that they experienced as part of the loss, you want to pay attention to that, because the trauma, if it's untreated, it can keep pulling the person back into the memories associated with that trauma. And they really could use the help of somebody who's a trauma therapist to help them work through the trauma on its own. What we call a comorbid. It's happening at the same time as the grief situation. So a comorbid diagnosis of depression. So you might ask a client, have you ever worked with a therapist? And if they say yes, was there a diagnosis that was associated with your work? And if they say, I was treated for depression, anxiety, how did that go for you? Are you still seeing this person? So just inquiring gently, if there's a diagnosis of depression, we want to pay attention, because grief can present itself like depression. And it can exacerbate a person who's already dealing with depression. And that's where we call it complicated grief, because it's not just normal grief, it's complicated with another situation. Substance abuse or addictions. Now, when I'm working with a person and doing my intake, I always ask if there is any active substance uh, dependency or addiction or abuse. And I can't work with, I choose not to work with a person who is dealing with that because they are not available to the coaching. They're really having an underlying situation that's got their attention and draining their energy in that capacity, and they're not available for coaching. So this is something you definitely want to refer to. It's either a substance abuse counselor or somebody who's in the mental health profession who's really qualified to deal with that. And I don't take that person on. I may take them on as a client in coaching if they're subsequently and at the same time concurrently seeing a therapist, and that both the therapist is aware that they're receiving coaching and sort of gives their that they think that this is in the best health, best interest of the client. Also eating disorders, if you anorexic or bulimic or any of these eating disorders where you're noticing, the symptoms of anything like that, you want to refer out. Absolutely any kind of suicidal ideation. And you might hear a person say things like, oh, well, I woke up this morning, unfortunately, and this is something that people who are deep in their grieving might say. And you might want to ask, tell me more about that. Tell me more about, is there some kind of, when we say ideation, is there a plan? Is there a wish, for suicide? That definitely needs to be referred out, like right away. So any of these things would be indicators that this person, if you're coaching them already and they're going through a grief process and you're exhibiting any of these, you definitely want to have a conversation where, look, I'm really concerned about your client. I'm really concerned, and I think it would really be best that you work with me at the same time as working with a mental health professional, because I'm seeing some of the things that are really outside of the scope of a coaching relationship, and I'm not trained to be able to help you in these areas. So it's a caring conversation, and oftentimes I have a little Rolodex of professionals that I will refer out to. Would you like to have a conversation with this colleague of mine? So this is an important thing to pay attention to. How are we doing on our time, Chris? Am I getting close to the end here?
Yeah, you have about 10 to 15 minutes.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. So any questions for anybody based on what I just shared about this? Yes, Rich.
Yeah, thank you. This is quite a basic question. I missed the second half of the Anne Rioff quote about
Uh,
grief being in two parts, and I wondered if you could just say the second part because
the
uh,
second is remaking of life. So grief is in two parts. The
yeah,
first is loss. The
the
second
second
yeah,
is the remaking of life.
yes, yeah.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Anyone else? Any questions on this slide? Because I know this is important, and it's the question that many coaches have of how do I deal with this, when it starts to show up. So if not, I'll go on. So how can you help? And this next slide is not even just for people who are coaching clients, but it's for dealing with humanity, people in your life, perhaps, who are going through a grief and loss. Maybe they're not your coaching clients, but it's your sister, or your cousin, your neighbor. Here's what not to do. And, rationalize. Okay, well, there is a part where we start to make sense of the loss. And I'm talking often, this is really related to bereavement kind of losses, okay, where people are saying things to a person like, Bill was really suffering, so it's better this way. He's not suffering anymore. It's okay for the person who's lost Bill to come to that conclusion, but when you try to do it for them, it can feel really hurtful. It can make them really pissed off. And, because it's really telling them they don't have a right to their feeling. It's taking the mind and saying, well, you shouldn't feel that way. So that tends to be hurtful and piss people off. Also intellectualize. Oh, well, life and death are all part of the flow of, when we get into these high philosophical ideas, when somebody's hurting in front of you, you watch their eyes glaze over and they just go, thanks for sharing. I'm going to go now. So we don't want to intellectualize. We don't want to pontificate about, what they're experiencing. We want to really that doesn't feel respectful of them. We also certainly don't want to minimize their feelings. Oh, well, what's the big deal? It's just a cat. You can get another one. You know? And I've heard people say that. I have a client I'm working with, it's actually a couple that I'm working with right now who they lost their baby. It was a stillborn baby. And also, she had some very difficult physical complications from the birth. So they are grieving a lot. And they've had people tell them, oh, you're young, you can have more children. And, things like that, you just never, ever want to say because to minimize somebody's loss and their grief, it sets people back. It just infuriates them and it makes them just, like I said, want to wrap themselves in bubble wrap and just never talk to people again. So we never want to minimize. Oh, like I said, it's just a job. You'll get another. We never want to say that to somebody. Patronizing, that's kind of the same flavor of there, you'll feel better soon. This will pass. Time heals all wounds, all these little statements that they think that they're being helpful. So I just want to make this point. People think that they're being, let me help you figure this out. Let me give you some of my wisdom so you can, feel better. I know people have the best of intentions. Don't do any of these things. When somebody is presenting you and you say, how are you? And they say, well, my husband died 3 months ago. We don't do any of this stuff. We just say, oh, how can I support you? We don't try to fix them. Well, you know what? There's this course on grief that you really should take because, that'll explain all your problems and that'll help you get over this. Grief is not something to be fixed. Grief is something to be honored and recognized as part of the human process. We're honoring what was while we are moving to accept and readapt to a life without that person. So no fixing. Certainly don't abandon people. And this is the couple that I was telling you about. He was talking to me yesterday about he's on a soccer team, soccer club. And because people felt so awkward, his mates just didn't know what to say to him. They just kind of left him alone. And he felt so hurt. He felt so abandoned by his friends who just, how they don't even ask how he's doing anymore. So he says, I feel abandoned. I don't even want to go to matches anymore because people just kind of look straight through me like I'm not even there. And he said he talked to a buddy of his and he says, well, it's just because we don't know what to say. We don't know how to be. And so that it's really hurtful to feel abandoned in your time of loss. So here's what we can do instead. Listen, the people who are hurting, they want to talk. They need to talk. That's the most healing thing that you can do is just close the mouth, open the ears, open the heart. Just listen. Tell me more. Say more about that. Just really encourage. You don't have to talk. Listen. Normalize their experience. Yeah, I've heard, you were just talking about that you're having trouble sleeping, that you feel like you're going crazy. I've heard that's kind of part of the experience. It's okay, you're not going crazy. It's just part of the grieving. That's what I understand. So it's like, yeah, you've hit a wall. You feel like they had the rug pulled out from under you. So yeah, you're going to feel this way. also acknowledging their experience. Yeah, and just saying, yeah, this sounds really difficult. It sounds like you're doing your best to cope with a really difficult situation. I hear you. I'm here for you. Be a companion. And that's what I mean by I'm here for you. A companion of grief, this is the work of Dr. Alan Wolfeld. He talks about don't walk ahead of person, don't turn, don't push them, just walk alongside them. Just be with them while they're experiencing whatever it is they're experiencing. Just be their companion. Use empathy. Now, empathy is that quality of I feel what you were feeling as if it were happening to me. So we're not using sympathy. We're not going, oh, you poor thing. Da, 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 da. We're using, if this happened to me, I would probably feel the same way, and that's like an inner dialogue with yourself. So it's like we are really showing up in that place of, yeah, I could only imagine that if this happened to me, I might feel the same way. And stay in their world, stay connected. Even if it's just a phone call every once in a while. How are you doing? Tell me what's going on for you. Would you like to go out to lunch? It's like this abandoning, this because we feel awkward, so many people that especially I've heard this from so many widows where their group of friends, sort of, oh, it's too weird to have just one person come when it used to be the couple. We don't know how to do that. Make room for these people in your life and in your social situations, and stay in their world. So that's it for my presentation today. I hope that this is helpful both to you as a coach and as just a human being, accompanying another soul who's having a difficult experience. So I don't know if we have any time left for questions. I also wanted to let you know I have some resources for you if you would like to. Receive some resources from me. My email is at the bottom of this. I also have a free guide of 5 tips to help someone who is grieving. It's other resources as well. And these are all great books. These are books that I've used in my practice. And yeah, if you'd like to contact me and talk about maybe a client situation that you're going through, I'd be very happy to talk with you about that. So I'll open it
We
up
do
for
have a few minutes.
Yes.
Yeah, we do have a few minutes. And I think I saw John's hand up.
I thought I saw John's hand up. So, John?
John, change your mind.
I got so nervous. I just can't.
Oh!
I had to find my mute button. My mouse was confusing itself. Carrie, so wonderful. Thank you for the wonderful presentation. I loved it. One thing that I just was thinking about was this idea about comparing grief.
Hmm.
And
Yeah,
that's
say more
that's
about
pretty
that.
common. Well,
Yeah.
something that's really easy for us to fall into, and
Yeah.
even for our clients and those our loved ones. Why am I think about kids, and maybe one of their first losses, profound losses, could be the death of a pet,
Mhm.
and they're just devastated. And then maybe their uncle who lives across the country, they die, and they just have no response, and that can be really confusing for a child.
Mhm.
And so I really like thinking about this.
Yeah.
Comparing is something we want to really avoid.
Yeah, absolutely avoid it. I work with people going through divorce, and I talk to them about divorce grief, and I work with people going through bereavement. And I can't tell you how many times that people in the opposite camps will compare their grief and loss to, well, you had a husband and you threw him away, so you don't have the right to grieve. I've heard statements like that. like you're comparing your loss against somebody else's or somebody else's to yours, and you're going, I don't have a right to feel this devastated by the loss of my dog when my neighbor has just lost her husband. I mean, how can I have a right to my own feelings about this? So comparison is useless. It's a waste of time. It's something that if you hear your clients doing that, if you can challenge that thought of you have every right to feel the way that you feel, and comparing yourself and your situation to another person, you really don't know what's going on inside of them. And also, you hear people saying that person's not grieving enough, they're because they're not, talking enough about it. So it's like we really never know what's going on inside of another person, and it helps to just remind people of comparison is not helpful. Rich.
Thank you. I just wanted to say a really profound thank you for this session. I thought I knew quite a bit about how to respond sensitively to people going through losses, and I mean I did know a fair bit. But I have to say, the under the tasks of mourning, the one you listed, which was helping the individual create an enduring connection with what was lost as part of the remaking, I find that totally transformational. And so I'm gonna that's gonna continue to resonate with me. And I also wanted to say thank you for making it clear in so many of the ways by explicitly linking with the ICF competencies, just highlighting how we are trained to be able to be really effective supporters for people in these difficult moments. I thought you really did that clearly, and I'm really grateful. Thank you.
Thank you, Rich. Yeah, that was the message that I was hoping people would take away of, I know how to do this. I could just take the weirdness off of it of thinking that, oh, because this person's crying, take them to therapy. No, you have the capability, the training, the ability to sit with and be that present. So thank you for that, Rich.
Pat has a comment in here. Must agree about the power of this presentation. Carrie, you have a wonderful voice and presence. Thank you for sharing with us today. Anybody else have any other questions or comments? All right. Well, we will do our closing. Thank you so much, Carrie. You're so amazing at this. I remember when we first met, and you're like, well, it's kind of a depressing subject. I don't know how many people want to come. It's super helpful, and giving us things to say on our own voice that are comforting without trying to fix is such a great reminder, and not making it about us when people are expressing their grief. So thank you for that. Thank you everybody for joining today. The reason we do these classes is for all of you. So thank you. Thank you, Carrie, so much for everything today. Thank you everybody for being here and being present. Appreciate you. Have a great rest of your May.